Hello, it's Amelia, not the pilot, just Amelia, and I'm here with my November and December 2024 book wrap-up. Yes, it's late. I'm aware. Also, perhaps if you watched my other video, you are aware that I'm wearing the exact same shirt as I was in the last one. That's because I filmed these back to back. Let's get into it. I have a ton of books to talk to you about. I have 11 books plus 2 audiobooks and 2 comics or graphic novels, I guess. This is gonna be a long one. Buckle up, let's go. I got some rants for you. I got some raves. So first off, we're just gonna go really fast through my audiobooks. I read The Lost Hero, which is one of the Percy Jackson books. I have been listening to The Newest Olympian, which is a podcast that I really love. You should check it out. It is this adult man who is reading Harry Potter for the first time, and now he's reading Percy Jackson for the first time, but as an adult who knows nothing about it, which is really fun because it's like seeing it through a child's eye, except the child is a 34-year-old man. So he's guessing all the predictions. It's very fun, and as a result, I've been reading along with him, or rereading rather. I actually haven't read any of the Percy Jackson like spin-off books or the second series. I don't know what they're called. I can't remember. I've never reread any of those. I read them when they came out because I was in, I guess, high school at that point. Middle school, high school is when these were coming out. And I loved them, but I literally haven't touched them since. So this has also been fun because I don't remember them too much. So I've been rereading along with him. So I just finished Lost Hero. Probably took me most of the year because I'm going along at his pace. He posts every week, and I would say he reads maybe 1 to 2 chapters a week, so it's super easy to keep up with him. So I read that, loved it, it was great. I also read, this is one of the books that I read this month, the Percy Jackson Ultimate Guide. This book was awful. I don't know why they published this. It's crazy. But he covered it on his podcast. I'd never even heard of it really. It's not even by Rick Riordan. It's just a guide to the book series, sort of. So it just has a page about each character. It's so bizarre. It really adds nothing to the series. There's no little tidbits. There's no extra facts. It's just Percy Jackson is 12. He's the son of Poseidon. He likes blue food. And then the next page is Annabeth. And it's got these really weird illustrations in it. Anyway, that was a 1-star for me. I read it in maybe 15 minutes. There's really not that much words to it, but it's just really bizarre. I don't really know why they published it. So there was that. The other audiobook that I finished this month was the 4th Harry Potter. As you know, I reread Harry Potter every single year, and I just feel like Goblet of Fire is perfect, Christmas vibes to me. I think it's because there's the Yule Ball. It just makes sense in my head. But we're not going to talk about Joanne anymore. Let's move on. So really quick, I want to talk about the 2 graphic novels that I read this month. Perhaps I was just adding to my overall book count. Perhaps they finally came in the library. I won't tell you. But I read The Tea Dragon Society and also Squire this month, and they were both really cute. I sort of don't like rating graphic novels because in my head, they're not books, they're art with plot. And so to me, I feel like they were both fun, but I don't feel like they have the depth of plot that books do, which is why I don't rate them on a 5-point scale. So I liked both of them, and I think the illustration style is really pretty. I think Squire had more depth to it than the Tea Dragon Society. Tea Dragon Society is just cute little person learns about diversity and has dragons that make tea. That was all it was. Squire is about this girl who comes from a immigrant minority background who wants to be a knight, basically. And her parents don't really want her to do this because obviously she is a minority and the soldiers are literally fighting her minority. But she wants to be a knight, and so they support her to go off and become a squire, which is the first level of knighting, I guess. It was cute. It was interesting. I think the author comes from the Middle East background, so it had a lot of inspiration from that, which was really pretty. Okay, let's get into the books. Man, I had some really good ones this month. So I read what I like to call spooky forest books, which are my favorite genre of book. So first off, I read Graveyard Shift, which is by ML Rio. I went to go see her talk about it in Edinburgh, and it was really fun. Graveyard Shift is her first, novella. It's a short story, really short. I thought it was really fun, but it was perhaps too short, which I guess is a good thing for her. You want a book to be wanted more. question mark. But at the same time, I feel like it didn't like get in deep enough and then pull me back out. That was not a very good explanation. Basically, the plot follows I think there's 5 characters who are all smokers who like to meet up at a graveyard every night. Not on purpose. They're not purposely meeting each other up there. They all live on campus at a university town, and the only place that you're allowed to smoke in the entire town is this graveyard. So they just happen to all congregate there, and now they're sort of friends. Basically, it's like a Scooby-Doo episode where something happens that's weird at the graveyard the one night, and then we get each of these characters' perspectives as they're slowly trying to put this little puzzle together, just for fun. It was interesting. It had spooky mushrooms. It was all set in, I guess, one night, I think, is the plot. And I like her writing style, but it wasn't as exciting as I was hoping it would be, just because you don't have enough time to really like connect with any of the characters or like get confused by the plot. Like it was pretty like, this is the problem, we solved the problem. There wasn't like simmering of like, ooh, who's it gonna be? I don't know. It was sort of immediately like, well, it's that guy and he's doing something weird. So I liked it, but I didn't love it, I guess you could say. I also read Don't Let the Forest In. This is another ooky spooky forest book. What do I talk about? Ooh, okay, I love this book. First off, disclaimer though, it is like a kid's book. Like it's definitely middle school, young adult, children's literature vibes. It was good, but it wasn't like in-depth. Also, there's no spice. There is a romance, but it's very young adult. And I can't really like put my finger on what makes it feel like a children's book to me, but it did. But it wasn't in a bad way. I still really enjoyed this book. But anyway, we have our boy Andrew, and I can't remember his sister's name. He has a twin sister, and par for the course, I never remember anyone's names. But I will say, so it's Andrew and his sister. They're twins. They're Australian. And they go to a private boarding school in Virginia, I think it was. Somewhere in the US. And at this private school, they have one other friend. So it's a little trio. I will say this trio vibe very heavily reminded me of Harry Potter, because they sort of had the smart girl, this is the twin sister, the like sort of rowdy rambunctious one, this is the other friend named Thomas, and then like the main character, moody, problematic one, Harry Potter. Which was Andrew, the main character whose perspective you're reading from. And it was so delicious. It was just so fun. Basically, Andrew and Thomas are best friends, but also, like, Andrew sort of likes Thomas, and he thinks Thomas likes him back. But he, at the end of summer last year, snuck a little note into Thomas's pocket, and he hasn't heard back all summer, and so he's really worried he messed up their friendship, but also that things are gonna change now. And that Thomas doesn't feel the same way. So there's that plot going on, but on top of that, there's something happening in the woods. And the people of the school don't really know about it, but Andrew and Thomas do, and they are really worried that they caused it. It's not really clear. Did they do this? Or is it all in his head? Because Andrew has been having problems since last year. He punched a mirror. And we find this out at the beginning of the book, that he punched a mirror at the end of the school year last year, and like his hand is all scarred and all cut up. But he like doesn't really remember the whole episode of what happened and like why he punched the mirror. And so we get the idea that he is an unreliable narrator. So are the things that are happening in the woods actually happening or not? So that was so fun. It's such a fun book. It also has ace representation, which I love. And the ending is just like really crazy. It really threw me for a loop. I like wasn't expecting it, so I will not say anything more, but I loved it. The only note that I will say, like problem-wise for me, I don't really know why this was happening, but the main character's name is Andrew and the other character's name is Thomas. And for some reason in my head, I could not tell them apart. Like I knew they were two separate people, but I never remembered whose name was who. Like I couldn't remember if his name was Andrew or his name was Andrew, but I knew they were two different people. And I think that's because they were both using he, him pronouns, and like I couldn't tell sometimes who was speaking or who was doing what, because they had very similar writing styles, I guess you could say. And so that was my only problem, that I found a little confusion while reading the book. However, I loved the book overall. 5 out of 5 stars. We love it. I'm gonna do one more Ookie Spooky Forest book. All 3 of these were like in my top 10 of 2024. This is called What Moves the Dead. It's also a short story. It's by T. Kingfisher. I'd like to shout out Carrie Cakes for her recommendation. She's at Carrie Can Read here on YouTube, but she talks about T. Kingfisher all the time, and I finally read this book, and it was amazing. I loved it. It's a short little story, but it was so interesting and so ookie spooky. It's basically like a gothic horror vibe. Our main character is going to this house in this grand mansion in the middle of the woods that's like a friend's house in the woods, but they get there and it's like completely derelict, falling apart, really gross, rotting, mushrooms, that vibe. Delicious. Love it. And we get there, and also like the characters seem really ill. Is it the house? What's going on? So I just thought it was really fun. I also note that not only does it have that fun little spooky vibe going on, and also was a short story, so I want to say it was like 160 pages maybe, super fast but really well composed. It also has this like really interesting aspect talking about pronouns, which I found fascinating. So basically it's like sort of commentary on gender and pronouns. The main character uses the equivalent of they, them pronouns. I don't know how to explain it, because basically our main character is from a like fictional country. It's set in Europe. I want to say it's set in England actually, this whole book, around World War I time or World War II. And this character, our main character, is from like a made-up fantasy country that uses a different language and has like a different set of pronouns than we do in English. Super great. Cool. Like very easy to understand. And so in the book, this character explains the pronoun usage and basically is like, well, we don't just have like he, him for boys, she, her for girls, they, them for non-binary. I'm simplifying. Obviously, I know there's other pronouns and things like that. But like in this country and in this language, there's also pronouns that are just for children, pronouns that are just for soldiers that sort of like non-binary ungender the soldier. Same with kids, but they're different. And there's also pronouns for this and pronouns for that. So there's like multiple pronouns, and I thought it was fascinating, but also it like explains the usage of them and then uses them the rest of the book. So our main character goes by Van Voss or something like that, which is the soldier pronouns, because our main character is a soldier. So I don't want to like go into it too much further because you'll see when you read it, but I just found it like a very interesting, alienating way of explaining pronouns, if that makes any sense, because it immediately makes us, the reader that is speaking English, reading this in English, see pronouns from a different perspective and then understand them. And I thought it was fascinating. So it was really cool. I really liked that. It's just very hard to talk about this book though, because it uses made-up pronouns. So anyway, I love that book. And this is all in 160 pages. And that's like not the main plot. That's just like a sub thing that happens with this character. And it has a little bit discussion about gender conformity and pronoun usage and things like that. And then we just move on. And it was delicious. All right, so now I'm going to get into the romances that I read in November and December. I don't know why I do this to myself, because I don't like particularly like romances, but like here we are. I'm gonna start with the one that I didn't hate. So it's called The Wedding Witch. It is the 3rd book technically in the series called X Hex. That's not what it's called, but that's one of the books in the series. I love X Hex and whatever the other one is called. But basically, they are what I have dubbed Hallmark Halloween books, which are basically like, it's like a Hallmark Christmas movie, but instead it's set and revolves around the concept of Halloween, which I like way more, because I love Halloween and I love ookie spooky stuff. So the first 2 books, they're a romance series, but they're like not super related, so you could read them in whatever order you want, and you get like vaguely spoiled, but not really, because it's pretty obvious that the characters are going to end up together. Come on, guys. It's a romance book. So anyway, it's related in the fact that each book is a different guy in the same family, I guess, is how they're all related. But anyway, I really like the other ones, so go check them out. This one, for me, fell a little bit short, but I still really liked it. Here's the thought. So it's called Wedding Witch. It's about a wedding at Christmas time. It's set in the same universe, so it's still witches and witchy stuff, but it's set at Christmas. And this is where I was like, why'd she do this to me? I loved the Halloween vibes. Why'd we go to a Christmas one? The Christmas one, everyone does a Christmas romance. I don't want another Christmas romance. But did I read it? Yes. So I did really like it because the writing was really fun and the universe and stuff is fun. It also had some of my favorite tropes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me describe the plot. So I yet again don't remember their names. Give me 1 second. Okay. The names are Bowen and Tamsin. So Bowen is the third brother in the Penhallow family. We've met them in the other books. Tamsin is a sort of new character. I think she's in one of the other ones for like a moment, but I really don't remember. She's like referenced the other books. But anyway, Tamsin is a mortal, but she happens to deal in witchy stuff. And she's sort of like a magical item obtainer, I guess would be her job. Like she finds weird archaic items for witches and like deals with them. Meanwhile, Bowen is a recluse, lives in the mountain, big mountain man. We love to see it. And he researches a lot. And the book starts with them meeting on Christmas Eve, I think it is, at a bar in London. And they start their business agreement where Tamsin will be working for Bowen to help him find magical items that he's interested in, that he's using for research. That's the setup. They both immediately are attracted to each other, but they don't want to get involved because this is a working relationship and they can't. But they both end up, through a series of circumstances, they both end up at a wedding together because she is trying to steal something from this family. She's doing a heist. So it's a heist book. I love a heist book. And it's forced proximity because he's also there, but he's invited to this wedding because he's a sort of like lord or whatever of the area, and this is a fancy family, so they invited him. They both end up at this house. It's spooky, weird manor house, and the wedding seems problematic, and then a time quangle happens and they get thrown back in time. I love a time travel book. Especially this one was like well done. I feel like sometimes there's problems with time travel. This one was fun. So that's all I want to say about the plot, because that sort of like is the setup, the first 4 chapters maybe. But it was really fun. I did really like it, despite my upset that it was set at Christmas time. But it was still very witchy and pagan, which I guess made it okay, because it was all about like Yule and their like witchy Yule traditions instead of like generic Christmas. So I did enjoy it. So that was fun. Now, let's talk about the book I hated. I read Fine Print. This is the Disney rom-com. I need to like deep breath, relax for this. So I went on a trip to Disney with my family in November, and I was like, oh, how silly, like I'll read a Disney rom-com while I'm in Disney. How fun. I'll read it on the plane and whatever. I've seen this book around for ages. I think the cover is really interesting. And I was like, that's like fun. And I worked at Disney for a bit. So I was expecting like a cutesy little rom-com between cast members and whatnot. My first complaint is that this book is 448 pages long. That's too long for a rom-com. That's crazy town. It should be like 200, maybe 300 max. 448 for a rom-com is ridiculous. It is way too long. It's like, ugh. My other problem with this book is that it is an HR nightmare, and here's why. So this is the plot. We have our girl Zara, I think is how you say her name. There's no pronunciation guide, so I have no idea. But her name is Zara, or maybe Zara? She works at basically the equivalent of the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique at Disney World, Florida. If you don't know what that is, Google it. But basically, the whole book is set in, like, Disney World, but it's not using Disney World phrases or names because obviously that's a copyright nightmare. So she works at Bibbidi Boppidi Boutique. I think it was called something else. I don't remember. And her whole family are cast members. And she's always dreamed of being an Imagineer. It's called something else. But she has no schooling background and, like, no engineer background, whatever. She's just creative and fun, and she's having a good little time, and she loves being a cast member, and she is basically the perfect generic Disney cast member. Like, she's just so happy to be there every day working her minimum wage little lifestyle. Then we have Rowan. I love that his name is a tree. I think it's so funny. My favorite book trope is that all men in books are named after or smell like trees. I think it's so funny. Once I said it, now you're gonna notice it everywhere. His name is Rowan, and he is Walt Disney's, like, grandson, basically. So apparently Walt Disney has 3 grandsons. Rowan, and I don't remember the other 2 names, but basically Walt Disney has passed away and has left Disney World's franchise money, big money, to the 3 grandsons if they complete a task. So the one brother has to marry someone and impregnate them, which I thought was a disgusting way to phrase that. But that's not this book. That's, like, the next book or the other one, because there's 3 books, 1 for each brother. Do you get the theme here? This seems like a common rom-com thing. I don't know why they do this. But anyway, that's a different book. There's also a middle brother who apparently has ADHD, and we know nothing else about him, but he's a different book as well. This is Rowan. He is the baby grandson, and he loves art, but his dad is mean and told him he needs to be a man and not do art. So he is repressed and angry, and he is basically a CEO. So Rowan shows up at Disney World, Florida. The task for Rowan is that he must spend 6 months in the park and then solve the park's biggest problem, okay? So he's down in Orlando. He hates it. And he is basically a CEO, and he is trying to figure out, like, what's the biggest flaw of the park. And so he's going to all these meetings, and he's joining the Imagineer team. And he's basically like, oh, I should just build a new ride, or, like, fix a ride. That's his thought. And he meets our girl Zara, basically immediately. They have a little meet cute. But then there's apparently this, like, big competition for all cast members can send in an idea for, like, a ride or a float or something like that every year, annual tradition, whatever. So she gets really drunk and she submits one because she's always wanted to be an Imagineer, and guess what? They choose her. And her choice, her little write-up, is about how this one ride is, like, absolutely awful and needs to be completely redone. And it turns out that her ex-boyfriend was a horrible person and stole her idea for that ride, and it submitted it last year and it got made, and she's really upset about it, and also obviously traumatized because it was her ex-boyfriend and they had all these problems. Already, this is, like, too much plot stuff going on for a rom-com in my opinion, but, like, whatever. So that's going on. So they chose her, and it turns out that she also happens to be best friends with Walt Disney, because apparently Walt Disney used to walk around the parks and he used to talk to just her, and they used to share ideas, and he used to be like, oh yeah, you're so smart and creative, and they came up with this idea for the ride together that the ex-boyfriend stole and changed, and now it's bad. That's so much, like, that's the setup for the plot. That's not even, like, the rest of the plot. Okay, so basically, they hire her, and immediately, instant attraction, he has, like, massive boner for her, is, like, making out with her at work, big HR nightmare, and basically, immediately, he thinks she's gonna, like, sue him because her boss is making moves on her that she doesn't want, but what he doesn't know is that she's really nice, she's a pushover, and she will not be suing him because she also loves him. And so this is, like, sort of where my problems began. All in all, I'm not gonna spoil anything, so if you do want to read this, you can. I will say, I feel like the epilogues, there was 2, which I thought was a little crazy, were quite cute and sort of redeemed the story a little bit, but overall, I feel like he is such a big walking red flag, and he does so many problematic things that she either forgives him for almost immediately. There's a little, she's angry, and then she's like, okay, but he's really hot. And the spice is good. And I'm like, girl, he's a red flag. He's literally a walking red flag. And so he makes too many mistakes in this book. And I know he has like zero social skills and he has his own problems going on, but she's like such a ray of sunshine, joy of my life type of person, and he is a walking red flag billionaire CEO. But maybe it's the money. Maybe she's like, the spice is good and he's rich, honey. Get that bag. Honestly. So it wasn't the worst rom-com I've ever read, but it like also was not that good and so long. Yeah, I guess my main problem is that he was like very aggressive and protective of her and like aggressively rich, if that makes any, like very flaunting his money in a weird way. And yeah, I just don't believe for a second that he like became better during the book. All right, so that's that. We're gonna take a little break from that and we're gonna jump into, I had a little Scottish phase, because if you don't know, I usually live in Scotland, but currently I'm home in New Jersey. So I was missing Scotland a little bit, and so I read a few Scottish books, and by Scottish I mean loosely Scottish. They were both written by American authors, but they're set in Scotland. My mistake, I guess. First I read Bravely, which is a kid's book, but it's the sequel to Brave, the movie with Merida, and it's written by Maggie Stiefvater, which is one of my favorite authors. And I've been meaning to read this for a while, because I was like, this sounds like a conglomeration of things I love, but also it's a kid's book, and it's a Disney spin-off sequel book, which I've never read before, but I feel like they sound bad. So I read it. First off, I just want to say that I think it's like fascinating to me, the publishing industry aspect of it, because I have a lot of questions that I don't know the answers to. But if you are unfamiliar, I'm pretty positive, so I don't actually know, but this is my theory. The way this book was written is that Disney Publishing, so Disney Hyperion, puts out like a prompt, and they say, we want someone to write a book that is about Brave, for people who are fans of Brave can now go read this book and consume more Brave media after the movie's made. But there's like caveats and plot points that need to be in the book. So it's a prompt with like very specific things that you have to check off. And then any author can say, I want to do that, and they take it and now it's theirs, right? And then they write it, and then Disney has to approve it and publish it. So you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get this published. So I'm really curious if Disney reached out to Maggie Stiefvater and said, hey, can you write this? Or if she and her agent, rather, found the prompt and said, oh, I'd like to do that, let's do it. I don't know. I'm very curious about that. I'm also curious about like what were the prompt guidelines, because to me it sort of seemed obvious-ish. For example, the way the books work for like Disney or Star Wars, any like IP like that, the book needs to add onto the world building and be in conversation with it. So it's got to still be like canon, but it can't be so canon important that if they do ever make a sequel to Brave the movie, that this book no longer makes sense or interferes with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if for some reason, I don't think they will ever do this, but if they made Brave 2, the sequel, the squeakle, if they made a sequel to Brave as a movie, people should not have to read the book, and the book cannot influence the like plot and the characters too much, which I think is such an interesting conundrum. So anyway, in the book, I thought it was fine. It's not like great, but the ending was like, ooh. I'm also very positive it was like directly sort of related to like that Jack Frost Rise of the Brave Tangled Dragons thing from like 2011. Tumblr girlies, if you know what I'm talking about, shout out to you. But basically in 2011, if you were on Tumblr, or Twitter I guess, probably also had it, people were obsessed with, and by people I mean me, the concept of Tangled, Brave, How to Train Your Dragon, and Rise of the Guardians, which were 4 animated movies that came out around the same time period, and everybody loved the four main characters, so Rapunzel, Merida, Jack Frost, and Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon. And they loved, like, the idea of them being friends and being in, like, the same universe. And everyone shipped Merida and Jack Frost a lot. To be quite honest, I feel like Jack Frost was shipped with everyone, but beside the point. I sort of feel like this book was directly speaking to that, because it did sort of read like Jack Frost and Brave Merida fanfiction. Not gonna lie. Did I love it? Yeah, because I loved Jack Frost and Merida. Other weird thing that I feel like was definitely like they had to check this off. They included like one extra female best friend character that's like a brand new character into this little world that is like Merida's adopted sister. It was really weird, to be quite honest, and I didn't fully believe it, to be quite honest. It was basically like Merida's maid is like super clumsy and like goes with the flow and like ditzy sort of, but the family loves her so much that they sort of just adopt her as their own daughter and ignore the fact that she's a terrible maid. I thought it was weird, but like I guess it worked for the plot. Basically the plot is that Merida, in the middle of the night, she hears a knock outside her door, and she goes out of the castle in the snow and sees like a young man, and she's like, "What are you doing on our property?" And he's like, "What? You could see me?" It's Jack Frost. It's not. It's like a new character, but he's Jack Frost coded. I don't actually remember his name. But basically, she ends up chasing him because he runs away, and she's chasing him all through the forest, and she immediately knows that he's magic, and she's like, "God damn it. Like, why is magic always getting me in trouble? Like, what is going on?" And she chases him through the forest, and she catches him. She makes a deal with him and this other witchy lady. His name is Faradoc, and the witchy lady is the Caliac. Faradoc and Caliac are like sort of like dueling mythology people. So like the Caliac like grants wishes and creates growth, and Faradoc destroys things and creates ruin. But together they coexist because there has to be ruin and change, or ruin and like death and stuff, in order for there to be change and growth, you know? So they coexist. But anyway, everyone hates Faradoc because he's causing problems, and no one likes when things get ruined. But basically, because Merida has caught him, he tells her like, "Oh yeah, like your town, your castle, Dunbrock, is gonna be ruined because you guys need to change, and you're not changing enough. You guys are complacent in life, and things need to change, so I'm gonna ruin your town." And she's like, "Please don't do that." And so she makes a deal with Faradoc and Caliac to change her whole family and Dunbrock by herself within a year. So then the book takes place over a whole year. It's really pretty how she goes all over Scotland and describes the landscape and the different weather, which is sort of all just cold and wet, which is correct. But she goes all over Scotland, and so it's like fun. And I thought the mythology was really interesting. I don't like know how accurate it is, or if any of the mythologies are like real mythologies, because I'm not familiar with Scottish myth like that. She has to go on a bunch of journeys to change her family. So her mother, her dad, and her 3 twin brothers, and also her adopted sister person, maid. And I just thought it was really fun, but it was sort of like slow because you're given this setup at the beginning of the book, and it's obvious that she's going to go on 3 little journeys to different towns in Scotland to have these changes and whatnot. And so she does go on these 3 little journeys to different towns and have these changes, and it was sort of just like, okay, you told us what's gonna happen and then it happens, so it was a little boring, but like it was good. But then the end was delicious, and it is a bit of like a slow burn romance, but also not quite. So anyway, I liked it. Alright, I have 4 more books for you. We're almost there. I read Luckenbooth, which is another book set in Edinburgh, and it's a very interesting concept. And it was recommended to me by my mom because she was like, "Oh, this is right up your weird little alley. You're gonna love it." And I loved the concept and I loved the idea of it, but I didn't love it. Here's the plot. It's a historical fiction, sort of based on real happenings, set in World War II era, but also it's like a very large time span that this book takes place over. I thought it was really interesting because I was not aware of this luckenbooth apartment building, but basically there is a building that used to exist, a tenement flat, in like the middle of the road in the Royal Mile. So if you're not familiar, in Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, there is a road that goes from the castle at the top of the hill to the palace at the bottom of the hill. It's called the Royal Mile. It's actually not a mile long. I think it's longer than a mile. And it's just like a big main street. It's a big high street. And in the middle of these two palaces, the palace and the castle, there's a massive cathedral called St. Giles. And apparently there used to be an apartment building, a flat building, like literally in the middle of the road called luckenbooth. I don't know who built that, but that's crazy. And it did eventually get demolished because people were like, this is in the middle of the road and this is crazy. But if you go to Edinburgh today, you could still see the outline of the building on the road. They made like a little golden brick thing. I have a video that I could show you right here that's showing you where the outline of it was. It's literally in the middle of the road. So I thought that was really interesting, especially like living in Edinburgh, that I was able to go see this place and find out some history that I wasn't aware of, because Edinburgh has crazy amounts of old and weird history, for sure. So the novel revolves around this luckenbooth flat building, and each chapter is from different people's perspectives that lived in the building at different times. So each chapter title is like Flat 7A, Alexis, or whatever the name is. I don't remember any of these characters' names. You know me, I'm bad with names. And so basically, I think the concept is really interesting because it's over a time span and it's all sort of connected and it's all in the same building and it's the different stories of the different people in the building, but it also has this like witchy fantasy element, but it also has this like minorities element going on with like queer culture and feminism, which was all interesting, but I like could not keep the characters straight for the life of me. I had no idea who was who, and I just like did not understand. There was just too many characters, basically. Yeah, I also sort of wish there was like a diagram in the beginning of the book or something to show me like who was where in the building, because I felt like that might have helped me maybe compartmentalize them better and like understand like, oh, they're the upstairs neighbors, or like, oh, they live in the flat now, but so-and-so used to live here, and now this person's talking about this person's ghost. It's crazy. It was really interesting, and it also definitely has like a lot of like microcosm of Edinburgh culture stuff going on, but at the same time, I was confused as hell. It was so much characters. I want to say there was like at least 10 different characters, which is just too many. But it was interesting. I'll give it that. These are 3 more books. 2 of them are in a series. I'm going to end with a good note. So I'm going to do the rant. So I read Sasha Alsberg's duology, Breaking Time and Fracturing Fate, and I didn't love them. This is a booktuber who I was like sort of obsessed with when I was in middle school, because she's like, I think 2 years older than me. She's like slightly older than me. And she was like super famous, popular in Instagram, booktube back in the day. I feel like she was getting like brand deals and stuff before brand deals were really a thing. She was making money off of Instagram before it was a thing. Getting invited to premieres, things like that. And she like looked like Clary from Shadow, whatever that was called, and that was like her claim to fame. And then after that, she like started writing books because she was reading so many books and recommending books. And she's actually where I heard of Outlander first, and she's a huge Outlander fan. She now today lives in London, but is still like obsessed with Scotland. And yeah, is the reason I read the Outlander, which is like the reason I visited Scotland in the first place, I guess you could say. Because I visited Scotland in like 2018 because I wanted to see Harry Potter stuff and Outlander stuff. And I did both. And it was a beautiful country. And now I live there because I just think it's so pretty. But basically, She has written a duology that's set in Scotland and it's basically just an Outlander knockoff. It's a young adult version of Outlander, and it just really wasn't for me. There's so many plot holes and problems with it, but also I feel like I'm being too critical of it because it is just a young adult fun little silly fantasy, and so I do think that people will enjoy it and whatnot, because it's really just like, if you like ACOTAR, you're gonna like this book, but I didn't, because I hate ACOTAR. The plot is Clara, a redheaded American who lives in Scotland with her dad and runs an Airbnb, and Callum, a Scotsman from like the 1500s, meet and fall in love. I don't even know where to start. Callum is best friends with this guy named Thomas, and they're orphans who were raised by like a street fighter man, and that's how they made their money. And the book starts with Callum and Thomas, and they like are at the pub, they're doing a little fight thing, and then they like go outside into an alleyway, and Thomas gets stabbed, and Callum is like, oh my god, my best friend, and freaks out, and tries to attack the dark and mysterious man, and instead ends up getting hurt and also stabbed, but somehow ends up sent through time and ends up in present day Scotland. It's set in this town named Rosamere, which does not exist. It's like a fake town. So I spent most of the book trying to like figure out where I thought it was in my head, because why did she just choose a real town? It was driving me nuts. I was like, I wish this was real. Like, I just want to know, because in my head then I could be like, oh, well, it took them like 30 minutes to get over here or whatever. But apparently it's like on the outskirts of Edinburgh. In my head I was sort of thinking it was in Fife. I don't know if that's true. Either that or it's like Rosalind Chapel vibes, which is like outskirts of Edinburgh. I don't know if that's still considered Edinburgh technically. Like Peebles or something. Anyway, I digress. This is not important to the plot. But basically, Callum shows up. Clara is your average modern girl. She is supposed to go to the University of Edinburgh, but for astrology or astrophysics or something like that. But she's dropping out. And she gets in her car and she's driving to her grandma's house, and she ends up like almost hitting him. And she swerves and crashes her car, and she gets out. It's raining, by the way. Very dramatic. And she gets out of her car and she goes to like see if he's okay. And he's not. He's like covered in blood and lying on the ground unconscious. And she's like, oh my god, I didn't think I hit him, but what the hell is going on? And so she picks him up, because of course she doesn't have her phone with her. She left it at home. I don't believe it. This is unbelievable. And puts him in the car and brings him back to the B&B so that she could call the paramedics and have the paramedics come look at him. Also, she's home alone at the B&B. The paramedics come and they just like sort of check him out, and they think he's just like a drunken man. There's nothing wrong with him. He's covered in blood, but it's not his, because his wound healed. Crazy magic. And then basically they are immediately attracted to each other. He's like, oh my god, she's the prettiest, richest redhead girl I've ever seen. And Clara's like, oh my god, what a buff man kills. I'm like, girl, me too. However, I will say, for this book, like, supposed to be like a fantasy rom-com, a romantasy, if you will, there was like really not that much romance. So maybe it wasn't like Outlander. They barely kiss. They barely have any like romantic interactions. It's more just like forced proximity. They end up together for the whole book, and then for some reason they're in love. But at no point did I really feel like they like built their relationship together, which I guess is one of my main problems with the book. I also feel like neither of the characters grew at all, because they are the same person at the beginning and the end, and all of the difficulties they have are like immediately resolved, and there's no problems. Anytime they have a problem, or like there's no stakes. Anytime there's a problem, they solve it in a page. They have a big battle, it's resolved in like a page and a half, and neither of them are hurt and they're all fine. That pissed me off. I hate when books do that. I want stakes. I want people to die. At no point in this book was I like, oh my god, they're in danger. I will say there's some fun tropes in it. For example, like, I love a hurt caring trope. What else? I also thought like the scene in the rain at the beginning was like very dynamic. It's like, oh, that's fun. I also felt like both books, to me, felt like they were set at night the entire time. I'm not really sure if that's true. But I did feel like there was a big problem with, like, description. Like, I didn't really feel like the locations were ever described, their outfits were ever described, or, like, what was going on was ever described. It was sort of just like, this is happening to them, this is what they said, and then we move on. So that was my problems. But basically, plot-wise, so they meet, they're in present day, and long story short, Clara's a chosen one, and she's got magic, sort of, and also a big sword. A girl with a big sword. And together, they go on this journey around Scotland to magical points, aka the Isle of Skye, and I think the Orkney Isles they go to in this one. Can't remember if that's the second one. But basically, she's like a chosen one, and the whole plot revolves around her being the chosen one. And he's just sort of there, which is, like, sort of funny in the fact that, like, he's sort of irrelevant to the plot, and she's such, like, a strong, like, kick-butt girl that, like, he doesn't matter. And I understand that, like, perhaps Clara is supposed to not be a damsel in distress, like, that's the whole point. But at the same time, it made them, like, not really make sense together, because the entire time Callum is just like, I'm a big strong man from the 1500s and I need to defend this hot lady, and she's like got her sword and she's good. Also, she learns how to sword fight in one day. Or rather, one night. Yeah, I just thought that he wasn't that hot because he was also, like, so irrelevant. He's just really not needed, and the whole time he's just sort of being a needy man, and Clara is like, he's so hot, and I'm like, he's not, girl, you're much better than him. However, my biggest problem with the series was the magic system didn't really make any sense, and also the time travel didn't make any sense, because I feel like the rule of writing time travel, this applies to, like, literally almost every time travel thing you've ever read or watched besides Doctor Who, is that if you're traveling through time, you can't also travel through space, because it, like, doesn't really make sense unless you establish that that's a thing they can do. For example, if my character, me, right now, is to travel in time to the 1500s, I need to stay in this location in New Jersey. So I travel through time, and I'm like, where am I? And maybe the house isn't here anymore, but there's grass, and that's where I am, right? But in this book, they would travel through time, but also travel, like, thousands of miles away. So they're, like, in Orkney, and they travel through time, but suddenly they're in Edinburgh. And I'm like, how did you get all the way over there? Like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And they did it multiple times, and it drove me nuts, because I just strongly believe that you cannot travel time and space at the same time, because it doesn't make sense. Unless you establish that to the reader, which you never did. I also feel like the magic system is very fluid, because every book, it's different. At first, Clara, like, has a magic, and she needs to, like, learn the magic by going to these, like, hot spots that are just, like, iconic locations in Scotland. The Isle of Skye and Orkney Isles. And so she, like, goes to the iconic location and then, like, meets a goddess and, like, learns a bit. And so suddenly she's a bit better at her magic. Like, it doesn't really make sense. But then in the second one, the magic system changes a bunch. I'm not even going to explain the second one because I don't want to spoil it, but at the same time, I can't even get into it, right? I just can't. I can't. Another thing that I thought was really funny, as someone who, like, knows Scotland, I felt like it almost read like she had never been to Scotland before, because every time they went somewhere, it was a 5-hour drive away, and I feel like that's not true. Like, sure, some things are 5 hours away, but, like, it was just every time it was like, and then she drove 5 hours to Orkney, and I was like, there's no way driving from Edinburgh to Orkney would only be 5 hours. Like, you have to take a ferry. It's not just driving. My other Scotland problem was that she describes the Fairy Glen as Castle Ewan, which is another name for the Fairy Glen. It looks like this. So this is the Fairy Glen. It's in Skye. It's like this really weird geological structure thing in Skye with these, like, rings, right? And then it's got this thing. And she calls it Castle Ewan, which is technically what it's called, but it's also called the Fairy Glen. It has two names. But in my head, calling it Castle Ewan to readers who don't know anything about Scotland, you picture a castle. I picture a castle. But technically, like, this rock is Castle Ewan. And it's just a rock. Like, I don't think it was ever a castle. And so that sort of annoyed me. There was also some bits in Edinburgh where they're like in the underground tunnels, which like just didn't make sense to me because they were like all the way across the city and then they went all the way over here, and I was like, there's no way. Whatever. And the tunnel, there's not like actual tunnels under Edinburgh. They're like, I don't even know how to explain them. They're like vaults more. They're more like a vault than a tunnel. There's like a series of vaults. Some of them are connected, some of them aren't. And they're really only in like Old Town area, and they're all near like the bridges. This only makes sense if you know anything about Edinburgh. I'm sorry. All this to say, I just really didn't care about the characters, the climax, the plot. None of it was shocking, and it all wrapped up in like so easily that it just really pissed me off. But if you like Outlander, I think you'll like this book. It does have a lot of Outlander references, including the Sky Boat song is referenced. That moment where like Jamie is standing in episode 1, season 1, and like looking up at Claire's window. This moment, there's a moment like that in the book. I feel like Callum is sort of like a knockoff Jamie, but also Thomas is also sort of a knockoff Jamie. Like, he's just like a big redheaded Scotsman. Then we also have, like, Falling Through Time and, like, Mystic Centers with, like, the stones and stuff. So those are all, like, Outlander vibes. So if you like Outlander, you might like this, but I did not. All right, last but not least, I want to talk about Spectacular, which was spectacular. This is the, like, Christmas special is what I would call it, of the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber. It is following Donatella, the other sister of Scarlet. You know, if you read Caraval. I would only read this if you have already read Caraval. I don't think you need to read Once Upon a Broken Heart before this. No. But it's super short. It's also illustrated. I think I read it in like an hour. But it's super fun. It's just like a fun little Christmas episode, basically, about Donatella and her relationship. I'm not going to spoil who that is with. I will say it had a lot of like the fun elements that Caraval and Once Upon a Broken Heart has, with like the ball gowns and like the beautiful fantasy settings with the big castles and like the tropey like things that happen. I will say the romantic interest I thought was a red flag, one of the things that happens in the book. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, like, I get where he's coming from, but at the same time, what the hell? Let me know if you feel the same way. I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, afterward, I was like, red flag, red flag. So that is my November-December reading wrap-up. I will catch up with you guys at the end of January with my January reads. I know this one was really long, I'm sorry. I didn't really think I was going to read that much at the end of the year because I feel like I had so much going on. It was a really busy month. So I only read like 3 of those in November, and then I read all of them in December, basically. So thank you guys for coming. If you haven't seen, I did a wrap-up of all of the books that I read in 2024 and talked about my favorites and my stats, so please go check that out. And I'll see you in February. Bye!